Hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining us. So, thank everyone for joining us both in person and online. My name is Marvin
Gracias por
Gonzalez.
estar
I
aquí
am
en
a member
persona
of
y en
the
línea.
Democratic Socialists of America's
Soy
International
miembro
Committee.
del
The
Comité
DSAIC,
Nacional de
along with
los
CODEPINK,
Demócratas Socialistas de
is
Estados
sponsoring this
Unidos,
tour. The
y
DSAIC
el
is deeply interested in the
DSA
Bolivarian
está
project
organizando este
and deeply
evento
interested in developing solidarity with the Venezuelan people.
para
To that
desarrollar.
end, we have sent two delegations to Venezuela, both of which I have been privileged enough to be a part of. First for the Congress of the Peoples of the World, and the second as guest observers of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, PSUV, during their last elections. During those visits, we've had the privilege to engage with the feminist movement in Venezuela, and we're very excited to continue these conversations and to bring it to a wider audience. So to that end, I'm happy to begin this panel.
Gracias, Marvin. ¿Cómo estamos?
Are we
¿Bien?
Are we good?
Okay.
We are really good. As long as we have good health and we're all together, we're good. My name is Claudia de la Cruz. They told me I should speak in Spanish, and I don't get upset over that. I'm part of the People's Forum Collective, and we want to welcome all of you to this space. This is a space that's anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, and anti-patriarchal. And I'm saying it clearly because that's who we are. So we're welcome you to this space where we collectively understand that what's most important is to advance the struggles of peoples and social movements. And we are clear on the fact that the US is the first conveyor of violence in the world, and that they have, it's countless the way that they have attacked Venezuela, because we cannot count how these sanctions have affected lives and over 30 billion of dollars. We understand that each country has a right of economic development, and the US doesn't have the moral ground to impose on any other country any kind of policy. When in the US we have over 140 million people who are living in poverty, where the continuous attack against the rights of women is in effect. So we are very, very grateful to have our sisters and comrades all the way from Venezuela who are going to share with us the impact of the sanctions on the Venezuelan people and against women. And I think that in our context in the US, it's really important to listen to them and to make those connections, because here in the richest country in the world, in the country where we say we value democracy, we're attacking the right of women to have control over their bodies. So I think it's really important to make connections on how our rights are being attacked internally and externally. Again, we're very happy to have our comrades here, and we're very happy to have all of you here. I'm going to introduce our comrades. I have the challenge of facilitating or moderating, so I'm going to be introducing each of our comrades, and then I'm going to give them the time to introduce themselves. We have Anggie, who is a defender of Indigenous rights and Indigenous territories. She's a feminist organizer for the rights for reproductive rights. She works with women and youth, and she organizes against violence in general. So let's welcome Anggie. I'm going to make an announcement. If anyone needs coffee, our cafe is open. And we have Mónica, who is a comrade who works in the arts field. She is the director of the Herencia project. She works with Afro-Venezuelan communities. And we have our comrade Yolimar, who is an engineer. She has experience working on social movements. She's an activist, and she is an engineer who worked for Petróleos de Venezuela, and she's uh, currently an organizer with Todas Nosotras Violeta. Okay, so let's welcome all three of them. And they're gonna share their remarks, and then we're gonna open up the space for questions. And we want to thank Aldo and our sister who are interpreting, which is very hard work. I speak too fast. I'm Caribbean, so but I'll remind myself and remind you to please speak at a moderate pace so that our colleagues can do the interpretation. So we'll start with Anggie. Welcome. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Anggie Hernandez. I come from the Zulia State in Maracaibo, from Venezuela. I'm an indigenous woman from the Wayu people. In that state, we have 5 indigenous populations, and also along with the Wayu population, I'm a defender of human rights, particularly when it comes to indigenous peoples, women and territories. I had the opportunity to, and because of these issues, we're in Venezuela, there is a before and after when it comes to indigenous people's rights. When it comes to the laws, creating the laws so that we can be represented and acknowledged as a population that was unknown or excluded. We did this work as part of a social movement to not only be recognized, but also to be recognized in a true fashion. We have a law that applies to languages and another law that applies to our territories. And it's very little considering everything that we want and need to be able to acknowledge over 500 years of resistance and struggle as the first inhabitants of these territories. I come from a family that from all these processes, it's impossible not for me not to um, emphasize the work of my mother as a teacher of bilingual education who created a curriculum to around how to teach these languages that have been made invisible in a country where we had a rich culture even before colonization. We don't only see it here, but we see it in other places like Ireland, where there was a process of giving recognition to the indigenous languages spoken by the native people there. So to give you some context and some analogy on how we could look at this in some way. So besides that, we also worked on this system of providing orientation to indigenous people for the 6 states that have the largest indigenous population, because there was no way for us to provide services without the language barrier. And the language is so symbolic because it signals where you come from, your mother tongue. It is the origin of everything. So besides that, and also the right of to the land, which for us, our territories mean our mother, because the land is our mother. And if we speak of our territories and not refer to it as our mother, it is contradictory. So we defend both the right of our territories and also the rights of the women because we are the providers. We are the providers, and when it comes to food, we should stress that we are desert people. In the desert, there's no water, so we have very basic food. So, but we've always found a way to sustain ourselves. Now, perhaps you could say, well, how are the sanctions affecting a population that has always been lacking? But precisely because we are a people who've always been resisting, there was a whole process of getting recognition that wasn't just given to us. It's something that we fought for and we accomplished, because beyond getting an opportunity, it was about taking advantage of the historical moment we were living in. And I think each one of us has the opportunity to do that and be aware that this is the moment to do that. And we did that with most indigenous populations, in this case, the Wayu population, which we are the largest indigenous population in Venezuela and Colombia. Why are we the largest population? Because we, in some ways, assimilated with white culture or with the conquerors, but we are something that we preserved is that we are matrilineal. We're not matriarchal, because matriarchal would be akin to patriarchy, but we are matrilineal. That is that the person who passes on the tribal status is the woman. So when it comes to us, your father could be someone who is white, Asian, or black, but the child that is born to a Wayu woman is still a Wayu child. So what gives us a recognition as a people is the fact that we were born on the land, on the territory, that we speak the language, and that we identify as such. Now, this struggles have always been there, but why in some areas that are these desertic areas is why are we still there? Because we have a connection to that land, regardless of the consequences. So one of the things is if the fact that we don't have a diplomatic relationship with Colombia, and that really affects us because that's our territory. Our territory is between Venezuela and Colombia. Now, the fact that states impose those borders, that has nothing to do with us, but it does affect us. So it's impossible to think now that Colombians who are in Venezuelans who are in Colombia don't have a right to a vote. So this is something that's kind of subtle, but in taking into account all the effects of sanctions when it comes to food, health, and education, because after we were able to offer education inside rural and indigenous schools, allowing children to speak their own languages and also to develop writing and reading. Because also to recognize that when it comes to the Americas, the most advanced education curriculum, it comes from Venezuela. You could look for the book published by the Smithsonian on indigenous education. The chapter on Venezuela shows that it is one of the most advanced. In 2015, the National Assembly tried to abolish everything that had to do with bilingual indigenous education. And can you only imagine, after all the work we did and after having accomplished that, and also trying to eliminate it, was trying to erase our whole history. So when there when you have an impoverished area or a low income area, the access to their most basic services are going to be affected. In this case, just like any other country, we have all kinds of issues that happen every day, issues around corruption, around the borders. And on top of that, we see how things get more complicated with these coercive unilateral measures. And even though we have the right to autonomy and sovereignty and to decide by ourselves, and there's no way in which another state can come and here and impose and tell us that we're going to uh, it is inconceivable. It makes no sense. And I think just like any other people, as someone who might be from the US, from Puerto Rico, or from any other country in Latin America that you all come from, to have the autonomy and and to have the power to be sovereign on your own territory. That's what we strive for. And also, we could have hold different political, cultural values and opinions, but it's important to stress that those differences, instead of looking at them as something that we cannot reconcile, those differences should we should look at them as something that brings us together and complement each other, because those differences exactly is are what going to bring us together to move forward. If we cannot reconcile our differences, it's impossible to move forward. So we should always have the will to do it, because it all starts from our will. Thank you so much, Angie, for that. Monica, can you share with us? Hello, hello. Hello, can you hear me now? Well, first of all, thank you so much. Uh, Big, friendly embrace in solidarity, the fact that you are here and that you're online listening to our lived experiences, and to be the spokeswoman for millions of women, children, young women. It is an act of profound solidarity and gratefulness from us to you all. Myself, Monica Mancera, I'm an arts and cultural administrator of the cultural uh, project at NCF for us, culture, and take to promote Afro-descendant culture is to give us a sense of belonging, is to give us shape and multiply our legacy. If each and every one of us has a heart, if we did an exercise right now where we were to touch our heart, the beating, that first organ that develops, that beating is our common inheritance, which we can feel when we touch and hold each other and reclaim ourselves. So that's a work that we've been doing for years. So you could look at this and say, okay, yes, we have this beating inheritance to sustain and maintain a cultural institution, not only in Venezuela, but around the world independently, requires of a lot of effort. Even here with the People's Forum, to be able to maintain it requires a lot of labor. Can you imagine with coercive, unilateral coercive measures considered by administration as sanctions? That means double the work.
Wanted to comment many experiences through these 8 years, almost 8 years, purpose that we have of sanctions, because so we can see and to place ourselves in the shoes of them, and we have that heartbeat that we all have. We're gonna go to 2014. Herencia has finished our third musical production, in which we shared with Cuban artists, Venezuelan artists, and with we led creations and innovations. Because in the case of the group and the Afro Venezuelans, we support and we innovate the musical colorfulness, the Caribbean Latin, and well, this album, and as a producer, and they are in charge. They are in charge of all of the values and organizations of the organization. And we place in the commercialization our album. And we work with Cuba Disco. We got to the first stage of the Grammys. And this is all happening around 2015. President Barack Obama has said that Venezuela is an unusual and extraordinary threat. Those of us in that moment, we didn't observe their words, and we kept working without taking into consideration what that implicated. Well, it turns out that immediately, all of the streaming services, Spotify, YouTube, canceled the monetization for Venezuela. So our album that we need so that we can get a Grammy, the more that it's listened to, the more reach as it has, that is what allows us to have to internalization, and so that all of you can share, just like you listen to Puerto Rican music, Colombian and Puerto Rican, that way you can also listen to Venezuela. Because we have a heart that beats, and so those sounds never reached other populations. So for that sound, our album was cut, and at the same time, basic goods started to disappear. So sanitary pads, which is for us women. So to find a way to creatively independently promote an album, and say that we are signed with certain groups in an independent form, the Afro Venezuelans. And at the same time we're promoting our album, we're in search of sanitary pads. And then from that, I started using toilet paper. And then when toilet paper was limited, I started to use old t-shirts that I wasn't using. And that's what I use for sanitary pads. And so the precarity that was continuing to be placed on us, and how commercialization to push, because commercialization's promotion, the diffusion, and the efforts that we had to keep pushing forward a project. And in the case of Herencia, is that our fundamental base and it's education for youth, kids, women, when we talk about drumming. And so little by little, we began to lose these feelings to 2017. We got to 2017. Wow. In 2017, transportation services have begun to diminish, because we're talking about unusual and extraordinary threat. This became more relevant, and this became present and more progressive and increasing in the applications, executions, and laws in our against us. I'm not saying that in Venezuela there aren't problems. There aren't problems. Yes, there are problems. Yes, there are shortages. Just like in this territory, just like this weekend. And so how are we also presenting in the ways that these sanctions begin to be applied and how our daily life was increasingly changed? I was called in the arts university because of all the work I did with Herencia to be a part of the staff in one of the few universities that are free and specialize in the arts in Latin America. And I accepted this challenge to incorporate myself in the staff. And within that time, to push youth that couldn't see Venezuela as a destiny. Imagine thinking about that whole thing about the pads, and that's only one case. And all of the resources that we were losing. Imagine trying to encourage from the arts. How can you motivate youth in that time? And then violent protests began in the country, violent street protests. But for us in this term lexical, we call them guarimbas. It began to affect greatly transportation. The protests to get out of the government, the national government. And so in this series of protests, students, how can you make students fall in love so that they don't see the migration as a solution? If no, to give continuity, to give love to the artists. That was a extremely hard task. And then all of this that I'm telling you, all of this was happening simultaneously to change the bolivar with into dollar. And so in this fluidity, we continue in Herencia with the drums. And there are the drums, the education as a community. Us as a community, an organized community from this movement, Herencia. From the pushing forward that my salary was enough for one coffee. Every payday, my pay was a coffee. So while I was waiting for my students, I would drink my coffee from my salary. And there was those scenes, those protests, and that's when the students' participation started to drop. And that we were looking for solutions to be able to push these youth. You know, this that I'm talking about to you, it also became an opportunity because we know that our dear Venezuela, the primary resource is oil, mineral oils. So we tried to find other forms, the methods to cover basic services, how we can elaborate the world of, sanitary pads to make that examples and to get through national politics about productivity. I'm not talking about executive power. But now, in terms of our communities, how we can organize ourselves, how we can find something to encourage ourselves, Herencia that we focus on the drum, the women to have double, triple, quadruple work, as Angie was spoke about. We began Herencia Mujer Tambor. This has been only done through a masculine interpretation. Now, us as women from Venezuela, we also push for that the drum is also a woman, and that the base of masculinity in the case of Herencia, it's mixed. We have men and women. but we want to take Herencia Mujer Tambor as a protagonist form. And I invite you all to be part of this experience and to learn about the way we educate ourselves. How we look for our health and our empowerment throughout learning and development through drum. You know, we're still at this time. We come to 2018. And I want to do an honor to an Afro Orlando Figuera. We saw terrible moments and where he was burned alive. Our Afro brother Orlando Figuera, because of his skin, it could have been someone like me. It could have been anybody else. Could have been any of my brothers, sisters, and only because of the color of our skin. It was a very aggressive moment. The protests in our country, and I wanted to talk that his death, the people who were supporting that racism, that hate crime, are the same ones that today encourage sanctions in the country. People who don't live in the country, people who from the exterior are asking, are permanently ratifying the deepening of the sanctions when we're the ones who are living through them. And so that I should say it's been the worst thing that we've been able to see as a collective, as a country, because us in Venezuela love. You know, Venezuela is a great family. It's not your friend, no. It's the cousin. It's the brother. It's a friend. It's our daily life in Venezuela. It's very close. So when you go to the bakery, you're gonna go with your cousin. There are expressions that are used to buy the bread to get, because you know every day you're gonna eat Portuguese or you're gonna eat Arab, but the confraternity in this country keeps creating. So it's been a horror to see that somebody be burned alive and to see everything that's happening when these applications of these measures. So we get to 2019, the health system, public health system, that we have gotten to great levels of advance. In 2007, I had a stroke, and here I am talking about it. But I can't say the same for my mother. My mother recently passed in 2022 in January because we couldn't take her to an ICU in Venezuela. And that became a terrible thing. And so to raise our voice, to say and express, and that all of you here in this construction, and that we're able to reach today this reunion to give a voice to to stop these measures. Extremely grateful to all of you. You know, we've started here, here, we're advancing. We're no longer missing paths. We're no longer missing toilet paper. We're progressing. Yes, there are some openings. Here, Yolimar is going to talk about petroleum. We're advancing step by step, but we could advance more through an auto determining form. We could expand more the drums. We can make so that our communities continue to advance because we have cultural and country rights. And all of these efforts wouldn't have been paralyzed throughout these measures. And yes, we have inconveniences, we have problems. Yes, things happen. Yes, there are fights, there are contradictions, of course. But that doesn't mean that one nation to another, because they don't follow parameters for how they should operate, for how they should advance, should have a right to step on us. Because we're seeing is how our daily life is being affected. We're being sanctioned. a government, a politician. No, the people, we the people are being sanctioned, are being punished for for choosing a path, for developing ourselves, for deciding for ourselves, for valuing the Venezuelanness, and to have different forms of creating our own world. And that successfully, nations and regions are developing that way. And so we our ask in this space is of extremely grateful. And this is going to allow us to help stop those sanctions that are forceful unilateral efforts. And so we can keep maintaining ourselves, and so that more kids and youth can continue working with drums, and that we can continue to construct a nation, a matrilineal, and a general community. And to be able to share with the world and share who we are and not continue to be blocked, and that we can have the resources that we deserved so that we can continue to develop ourselves. So maybe continue to converse. Thank you, Monica. Yolimar. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Yolimar M. Just like Claudia said, I'm an industrial engineer. I worked for over 10 years in a petroleum company in Venezuela. And currently, I'm part of the elaboration of projects, social projects, of culture projects through social organizations. Recently, I'm working with an feminist organization that's called We Are All Violeta, and how um, my previous colleague has said before, it's talked about supporting young girls, youth, when it comes to sexual and reproductive health rights and against violence, gender violence. Well, I am extremely grateful to have this space, to have this participation, to have you all be here. We came with many expectations to share our experiences and to reach out and create solidarity within the US and with Venezuela. Here we are representing, in a certain form, a part of the organizations in which we work in. With another form, we are being like, we're demonstrating the needs, the insecurities, and the expectations of the people who form part of our organizations. And that in this case, it's to express the inconveniences, the problems, the situations in general that we are living due to the applications of coercive unilateral measures by part of the United States government that are called sanctions. Because one of the questions that we should be asking ourselves as citizens, as a people, is why does one state have to sanction another? Why does one state have to disrespect the independence, the sovereignty of another people? Who gives them that ability to do that? And we know that when it comes to humanity, this has happened with a lot of countries in the world. One country against another. That's why with one form we're here. We have this look to another possible world. In a world where we can live within our differences, but with tolerance, with respect. without needing that one state needs to sanction another. So, we could talk about numbers, statistics, yeah, a bit more exact, a bit less exact, a lot of things, yeah. But I think the main thing is to say, if we talk in terms of direct effects with the application of sanctions in Venezuela, as well, there are a number of people who couldn't access health services and died. That would be a number, right? Maybe we don't have the exact statistics. There are many estimates, and they're there so that you can look at them. So we could also look, if we go to the US Department of Treasury page and we check sanctions of Venezuela, and we can see all, just as Monica was saying, we can see everything that they've said, those applications, those promotions of those decrees in 2015, that they indicate that we were a threat towards the US, and the amount of unilateral measures that have been applied. And there we can observe that they are directed towards all of the economic sectors. And the economy has to do with the society. And the process, the economic process that a society lives,
It's what allows them to live, access services, and as Monica also shared, when all of these measures are going to affect, their intention, as stated, is to affect a sector of the political class in the country, political actors, key players, but that has not been the case. All these measures have affected the entirety of the Venezuelan people in general. Okay, and this we can see in the fact that opposing political sectors have asked the US government to stop the sanctions because they have realized that this is affecting the entire Venezuelan people. So, if, for example, will look into my experience in the oil industry, if you are here, you probably already know that Venezuela has an economic model, an extractivist economic model. And this whole welfare system has depended on oil production. So one of the ways in which the U.S. Declared, I'm not saying this. This was stated openly. So one way to attack our system on behalf of the U.S. is to go after our economy, which is vital in any society, but in a particular case in Venezuela, the heart of our economy is the oil industry. So we have seen that most of these sanctions are targeted to the oil industry. Prohibition of funds from the oil industry, freezing of accounts, elimination of bank accounts, stopping companies from accessing goods and services. And this also meant this threat of against suppliers of goods and services in the oil industry, industries that are very well known here. These are U.S. companies, banning them from having any business with the oil industry. So, for example, if we look at oil production in an oil ring when we look at this infrastructure that has certain needs, and the technology that's needed in this industry is something that was provided by the U.S. because for many years the oil industry worked uh, under the U.S. model. So when it comes to the pumping for that industry, tools and management, chemicals for treatment, and all kinds of goods and services to carry out those activities that were supplied by U.S. companies. Well, as part of these sanctions, it was established, or the U.S. government told these agencies that they should not provide it, supply it. So you can imagine that maybe you're at home and it's like a home where they close a door, they close a window, and they close another window, and that's how they have you under siege, and that's besieged. And so that's what happened to the oil industry. So there was a decrease in production because they had to close their production, and that is just when it comes to production. But if we see and the entire supply chain, we have seen how those sanctions had an effect. For example, the fact that they didn't have, they weren't able to get their supplies for the production of gasoline. And so when we see that, we can see the chain of events that has unfolded, so in which ultimately those who are most affected are the Venezuelan people. So as we are saying that the economic sustainability of the country in Venezuela is the oil industry, and now the production dropped. And we could also look at data that says that for every $100 that we used to get, now we're down to only $1. So more or less, that's how our income revenues dropped. So we see that this was what sustained our welfare system run by the state through its institutions, and this is what was used to guarantee the right to food, health, cultural rights, the rights of indigenous people. That entire welfare system has been increasingly affected by the implementation of these sanctions. So, for example, in my personal experience working with social organizations on different projects, we were coordinating agricultural projects. We saw that it was impossible to import fertilizers, seeds, and supplies like machinery. So if we look at other examples around the world, obviously this whole set of unilateral coercive measures that target the economy, they end up affecting the human beings who depend on that economy. So for us, it is essential to create awareness of the fact that our individual right, my individual right to access the health care system, and then I find that they don't have enough supplies or medication to get treatment for a certain illness, the freedom that I have to access the healthcare system is affected. And that applies to every other sector. So it's important that we understand that these kinds of measures are illegal and that ultimately they become a mechanism that represents a war that perhaps is not a war where they are dropping bombs, but it's a war on our territory that is real all the time, and that it becomes a crime against humanity. Well, my colleague here knows more than me, but if we look at it from a legal perspective, right? So we really value the opportunity that we have from our sisters and brothers who organize this event and the other events we're going to be speaking at. And the main message here is that we're only here to defend our right to access the production system in our country, the right to be sovereign and independent. And what we want is that as people from the US and also for the American people who are here to understand that the application and enforcement of each and every of those mechanisms is establishing a precedent that are terrible for the whole of humanity. So we want that all of us understand the effect that these mechanisms by the US government has, and that you all help us demand a stop to the blockade. So we really value the fact that you're here, your participation, and as I said, the information is there, it's available. You could go to the Department of Treasury website and you can see and imagine the domino effect that each and every one of those measures have on the everyday life of every Venezuelan man and woman. Thank you so much. Thank you, comrades. I was listening to you speak, and I was recalling this U.S. government, U.S. president, who said in 1973 he said this when it came to Allende's government in Chile, and this is a practice that has been happening around the world. There's over 70 countries that have been blocked by the US. And who blockades the US for its crimes? That's the real question. And we have here our sister who's going to help us holding a microphone. We're going to take a couple of questions. I think that's about how much time we have left. Maybe. ¿Quién le gustaría hacer una pregunta? Hola, gracias por hablar. Así que mi pregunta es para Mónica. ¿Puedes hablar más sobre la música afro-venezolana y lo que significa para ti? Should we wait for all the questions and then we answer? Hi, good evening. So my question is in regards to when it comes to the communes and the Comunas project, because I know that Venezuela is suffering from the US sanctions. And part of this is because Venezuela has always been, and this is before Maduro and Chavez's government, it's been an economy that depended a lot on oil, because oil is the strongest sector of the Venezuelan economy. And it's like if you affect the oil industry, you affect the entire of society. And Venezuela is a country that is rich on other natural resources. So I wanted to know what the role is of the communes on this project to stop being dependent on the oil industry, and how also what kind of role women play in there. For Venezuelan music, it's such a richness. I invite you all to, well, well, I'll start with our own. Follow all our social media, and that's where we share all our music. That's the first thing. Secondly, at this time today, we are transitioning. The month of May is we grow what we call Cruz de Mayo. We promote what we call Cruz de Mayo, and this has to do with the spirituality between what's indigenous practices, Afro practices, and this Arab Hispanic population. So, in this coming together of cultures, we have Flor de Mayo, which is a celebration, which here is how we honor what we have harvested throughout the year. And this instrument here is from the central region, from the state of Miranda. It is one of the drums from Fulia, and this is from one of the Black Afro-Venezuelan regions. And this is we used to play Fulia, and so we sing to the cross, which is to celebrate nature and to give thanks to everything for the whole harvest that was produced. And here in June, we have another big celebration, San Juan Bautista, which in December, because we should mention that everything we have with everything that we have shared, we have not stopped. Here in the month of December, we were able to call all cultural institutions and organized communities, cofradias, all of us who give life through Afro-Venezuelan traditions. We got San Juan Bautista to be a World Heritage of Humanity, and we have not stopped. It's just that we could have made more progress when it comes to our rights. And once we're done, I can share more music with you to go more in depth with what's our devotion. And this is why it has allowed us, women and men, to bet on life, to go on with our lives, these cultural manifestations. And that's why we're centering our conversation from culture, is why it has allowed us to overcome all these challenges, which is allowing us to move forward from a place of love, from a place of devotion to entities, from this place of syncretism, as Chicho Garcia said. This has allowed us to reclaim, and this has allowed us to advance and to overcome every challenge we have faced, because and say it again, we need that support to keep on going.
And all of us at Herencia with our teacher Manuel Moreno, he took funk as a manifestation, as a U.S. Black manifestation culture, and that's a beauty. And now we have Foncata. So it's just a mixture there, yes. So just to say a little bit about the Afro-Venezuelan culture, well, like any country that has passed through a process of colonization, in this case, Spanish colonization, the process of slavery, or well, Venezuela, millions of people were brought from Africa. And from then, and a very important process of resistance was generated. And within that process of resistance, cultural manifestations come about. But overall, throughout the coast of Venezuela, there exists because they came from various parts of Africa. And so there exists a whole Afro-Venezuelan resistance movement that in the latest years has been revitalized because Venezuela, and to a certain point, hasn't escaped from these racist postures, when we talk about African racism. But as my colleague Monica has said, that process of resistance, of Afro resistance, is one of the base and the sustenance of the resistance process as a people, in front of all of these economic blockages. I have a question. I'm part of Venezuela. There's an order, and there are people who have made questions. We have another round. We have another round. We have another round. We have a round. We have a round. We have another round. There's an order. This is what feminism in Venezuela. Para los que no saben, ¿a ti se importa el feminismo aquí? Claro que sí. Yo estoy aquí para escoger. Sí. Si tú estás para el escogimiento en Venezuela, no hay derechos de abortos. El aborto es legal en aborto. Tú, si vas a estar aquí, tienes que respetar el orden. Vinimos aquí para. Si vas a estar aquí, tienes que. No aquí. No, aquí no. Aquí no. No en este espacio. No vamos a pedir que se vayan. Tenemos que pedir que se vayan.
don't, if you do not, if you do not agree with this event, you are welcome to leave. You're welcome to leave. You are welcome to leave if you do not agree with this event.
tienes regla. En tu casa, la persona te respetan. Esta es mi casa. Esta es la casa del foro del pueblo. Yo le digo
We're
a los perros,
anti-imperialist, we're anti-socialist. We're anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, and anti-patriarchal. And we uplift and promote socialist values. And whoever doesn't care and like that doesn't have to come into this space. Period. We could engage in dialogue for as long as the order is respected. We did not say we were not going to have Q&A. We put forth Q&A, and we had an order of rounds. And so this is the wrong space to come and protest if you're willing to be in conversation. And so I know that there are two folks that still remained in the space, and I'm very happy that you did. But unfortunately, due to the fact that your comrades didn't know how to orderly ask questions, we're going to squash this shit right now. I'm going to say it in Spanish. Para el que no entendió. Todo espacio y toda casa tiene un orden. Y la gente tiene la posibilidad de entrar al espacio siempre y cuando respete el orden. Y en base de respeto se puede tener diálogo. Si entran a este espacio de una manera irrespetuosa, sin respetar el orden que se ha dado, no vamos a tomarlo como amigos ni como amigas. Se convierten en personas que definitivamente están en interrumpir un proceso. Y por lo tanto, eso no lo vamos a tener en el espacio. Y dije en inglés y lo vuelvo a decir en español ahora para que se entienda, todavía en el espacio quedan 2 personas que tenían el deseo de hacer preguntas. Pero precisamente por el simple hecho de que el orden no se respetó, no va a pasar. Así que si tienen preguntas, pueden hacerlo de otra forma y no va a ser aquí.
How can we respond? Or simply not respond? But all I wanted to say and leave it clear. Nobody from the government has paid us to be here. We are here within a solidarity process of social organizations, social movements from the United States, and from another form, have combined with our reality, with our situation, independently of any political stance. But if there's something that I wanted to clear, and I say in a personal form, and Claudia has already said some specifications that, of course, that I'm talking of a left stance, a progressive stance, yeah? I identify with those values. And so why do you have to attack me for that? And so that is the problem of our humanity, the problem of our society. Why can't we respect different stances? Now, this is something that shows what we've had to deal with. Monica was saying it, and I get emotional. With the case of Orlando Figuera. An Afro-descendant man, that the people there against the government, they burned him and they murdered him. A violence that starts like that. Yeah? We are not denying that there are problems. There's corruption. We're not denying that there are problems. We're not putting that into question. We're showing a face of what we live on a daily. That's all. Projects that we are starting. Projects that we are lovingly developing. This drum has been the medicine from 2015 to 2022 to 150 women who, historically, when it comes to women, that we have 2, 3, 4 jobs to get gas, to get food. And, this has all been the fruits of unilateral coercive measures. And so here we're giving a solution as a community because our place is Venezuela. It's our country, it's our home. And sovereignty is constructed by all of us, not just in Venezuela, but here in the US and Puerto Rico. And that successively, this is how sovereignty can be constructed. We constructed the people. Do we have political stances? Yes, obviously. I choose this, I support this. I put this forward. Yes, of course. But that doesn't imply that I have to drag someone else. That's what we want to show in today's time. How we women, young women, we have dealt with unilateral coercive measures. And then once I worked at the college and after I got a stroke, and yet these are unilateral coercive measures with gas as this. And that's when I immersed myself in the experience of Herencia. I decided this. But it turns out there was something that happened in 2015 that were the measures. And from there, our life changed. In 2010, there were problems. In 2015, there were problems. In 2022, there are problems like any country in the world. What have we done to deal with specifically the unilateral coercive measures? How are we doing that? And that you listen to us to see this, because this information doesn't come here. We live it day by day. Me, I got spurs in my feet because there was no access to transportation and I had to walk all of Caracas to keep playing the drum. Because life goes on, it continues. We have to continue. It's necessary. It's necessary. And of course, we're not denying the reality of our people and their choice to have migrated. That's why I said in 2016, working in the arts university, it was a difficult time that I had. How can I make youth fall out in love so that they don't leave the country, because the situation was very difficult. And of course, the national government came up with solutions, yes, to continue with the measures, is of course us as communities, because life continues. We look for solutions, but we have to also make it clear, like, hey, like, we're suffocating. We need to breathe. We need to breathe. And that is the image of our African American comrade, George Floyd. That's another way that they have us here, that they're not letting us breathe. They don't let us breathe. And then we need to express it. Yeah. Yeah, there are forms. That's why we started saying in the diversity, we're not denying that others exist. But that's what's happening. When we speak, come people and they say these things. But that's part of democracy. How can we deny that they get like that in front of a position because they don't agree? It's, understanding. That's democracy. But, they don't have to also keep tightening, choking us from another point of the community. So we want to make it clear that we are expressing ourselves without denying the realities. And we're thankful eternally.
Just allow me to say something. I think it's also important to say that respect and democracy, to have the possibility to dialogue, things that we have not learned throughout history, that we need to learn how to do, because we have lived under colonial systems and enslavement systems and capitalist systems that teach you how to go after each other and how to go after the minorities. So these are things that we should unlearn. And I don't think that there's a country in the world that has the power to be judge or police force or the one that tells you what justice is without having justice within their own territories. You were talking about George Floyd, and we have statistics where black men are killed every 24 hours. So someone was saying calling the police, and in this space we don't call the police. In this space we understand what the police does to black, indigenous, brown people, poor people. So that's not part of our politics. We have to learn how to unlearn, and that's important. Venezuela has taught us a lesson by sitting with the opposition several times, and not all the opposing groups in Venezuela are in favor of the sanctions, and not all opposing forces in Venezuela are against are in favor of U.S. intervention. Why? Because U.S. intervention has meant war and death, since 1954 in Guatemala, since 1973 in Chile, since 2009 in Honduras. We have to learn from history. Intervention only means the death of the working class, of the majority. I thank you for your patience, and I thank the majority of people who are here for their patience, because we have, with a lot of dignity, we were able to reclaim a space that's ours. And if you don't want to be here, you don't have to be here. Well, before I respond to our comrade who asked about the communes, I want to speak on abortion because that's my main issue. That's what I work on, and that's what I deal with every day. And who else if it's not farm worker, indigenous, black, poor women who suffer the most from this? Abortion has always existed since the beginning of time through medicinal herbs with different practices in different communities. Who said that it was illegal? The white imperialist, colonialist, patriarchal project is the one who said that it was illegal. So we're dealing with this now. Who poses the most against these practices, not only here in the US, but elsewhere in America. But it's the same that's still in place. The white, patriarchal, colonialist, imperialist system, because we have always held our practices in the ways that we give birth, including that as sexual and reproductive right, because it's not only about sexual relationships and how we're going to give birth, but it's also about abortion. The fact that we have the right to decide, the fact that French king changed the ways that we give birth because he wanted to see how his son was born. That still affects us as women. To talk about abortion in Venezuela, yes, there's different positions, stances, not only from the government, but also from the religious system that opposes abortion, because it's mostly the religious and the white patriarchal system that is established in Venezuela that oppose it. Yes, but what happens is that people who are not in Venezuela or don't live there don't know how the kind of proposals exist, because it's not just about the government imposing what they're going to do, but we as social organizations have to bring forth proposals, because we have the right to bring forth proposals. So there's 4 different ways in which we're looking to legalize abortion, because first incest, second rape, and third, mm, mm, and so there is discussions in regards to this, and through the creation of several laws, including in the current constitution, there were discussions around this because the idea was that through social organizations find a way to negotiate around this. Well, if you have the right to an abortion because you're pregnant and you just want to have an abortion, yes, of course, I wish that could happen in Venezuela. But I have a question: has anyone from social movements here have sat down with someone from Congress or from the Supreme Court to discuss how they want to have rights to an abortion? I'm asking you that question, so we should. I'm sharing that so that we can have a context around this issue. So to answer the question around the communes system, the commune system in Venezuela, it's a mixture of different proposals that exist in different countries. And I say it like this because we indigenous peoples have always lived in communes. I have lived in communes since the beginning of time. So with the conquest or invasion and everything else that has happened since, it's difficult for us to break away from a system that has been imposed. So what we've been able to go back to, or want to go back to, is to go back to living in communes. And I would say that Venezuela has still a long way to go to achieve something that's ideal. Because, for example, in Switzerland, you see that they have a model that's over 700 years ago. And who were able to do that? The people from Scandinavia who went to different places throughout Europe. They were able to apply this model in Switzerland. And how did they do it? They did it with the consensus of 3 countries that granted this territory so they could live in this way, because they were not able to do it within their own territories: Germany, Italy, and France. They have communes, and it is the model. We could say it's almost perfect, where everything that is decided, if at that bus stop I want to paint a blue, that's not decided by the government, by a congressperson or the courts. It's decided by the people within their own territories through an assembly. And that is what we have tried to implement and do in Venezuela. And that is the biggest expression of autonomy, sovereignty, and independence in each and every one of its states. Just like here in the US, each state has its own laws, and which they have tried to advance in that sense. I don't know if you have a question. I explained to you the issue around abortion and how myself, Anggie Hernandez, looks at the commune system in Venezuela. I also just wanted to say that here in this country, I'm there, and I don't know a lot about this issue. They've also trying to ban abortion a couple of weeks ago, just to add that to the conversation. Yes, that's why I'm passionate about this issue. And I would have been able to give an answer to our sister very calmly. But yeah, that's the reality that we're living in Venezuela. Well, I thank you for giving us context. The fact that you reminded us that Venezuelan society has gone through went through a process where a rich white man governed with capitalist interests before the triumph of the revolution, and there are systems that are still in place and that are being debated and that are being deconstructed by the people. So I think that oftentimes we expect from socialist projects, and in English we say entitlement, entitled, and really out of context and out of not looking at history, we try to deconstruct a type of capitalism that has pillaged the world. And we try to do it in 30, 40, 50 years. And we ask from popular processes what we don't demand from capitalist process. So the processes that are being developed by the people from our countries should have the opportunity to flourish, but you will not be able to do that with with a boot on their neck. And here in the U.S., where we benefit from what's being extracted in countries around the world, and there's a lot of work to be done, not only to lift sanctions and coercive measures, because that's the right term in Venezuela, but also the Cuban blockade. And we can go on with a list of all the countries and peoples that have been criminalized for wanting to be free. That also happens here when young Black and Latino men, young people come out to protest against the police. They find they're beat up by the police. And there are places in the US where the police has a larger has more funds than an entire country. And we have the duty in this country to act in solidarity and respect the rights of peoples to sovereignty. And with that, I want to thank you for sharing your experience, for being here and trying to link up with the people to break away from the blockade that exists. Because here we only get the information that we get from Univision, which is owned by the Venezuelans in Miami. We only get information that we get from Telemundo. And we need to start linking up and having exchange with people, with organizations, know each other, touch each other, and hold hands together. So thank you for being here. I told you. I warned you. So we're going to close up now. We're going to wrap up, and we're going to ask if people can please leave this space. And please don't engage in an argument. Let's not entertain this exchange. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for being in dialogue with all of us. Thank you so much.